Come on.
Yeah.
It's going to be okay.
I have a knee problem.
Oh.
Yeah. That was a problem.
It wasn't because you were afraid.
No.
Oh.
Not yet.
Good. I suppose that's good. Good morning, everybody. Chester, thank you for that introduction. Where did you go? I can't see you anymore, but thank you. Rousing as always. My name is Veronica Lie. I head up strategy at Xynteo, and I'm very delighted indeed to be your moderator for Square number 1 at this year's Exchange. All of us are here today in the room because we see how urgent it is to construct a new growth model, a new way of organizing our economies in a way that creates value for the many and not just the select few, and in a way which respects the boundaries of our ecosystem. And to illustrate this urgency, this burning platform, we heard 3 powerful eyewitness accounts from some key witnesses. And when we consider the challenges that they shared with us, it's natural to look to technology for the solutions. And after all, humans are technologists. One of the things that distinguishes us is our ability to create tools to make ourselves bigger than we are. Or else we would have been devoured millennia ago. You know, we're actually quite puny, slow, toothless things. But thanks to this ability, we busted through ceiling after ceiling. The wheel, the compass, the calendar, the clock, the printing press, the telegraph, electricity, the steam engine, the combustion engine, the jet engine. Within some 60 years of flying the first plane, we landed on the moon. Today, we've decoded the genome, we can see pictures of the origins of the universe, and we can put miniature 4x4s on Mars. It's pretty cool, and it's all thanks to technology. So I think it's perfectly natural that as we contemplate this next leap, that we're thinking, yeah, we got this, right? But do we? Can we trust technology to propel us through the challenges ahead? And to help us get under the skin of this dilemma, I don't think we could have dreamt up a better pair to kick us off. You agree, Hans? Good?
Yes, I agree.
We have here Hans Vestberg, the CEO of Verizon, which is the world's 15th largest company, and a pioneer in 5th generation connectivity. And we're very delighted to have Jimmy Wales with us today as well, the founder of Wikipedia. I think it's the world's 5th most visited website, and something that's been called, and I quote, one of the wonders of the world. So thank you, we're very happy to have you here today. So Jimmy and Hans, you both have very different jobs, and you run very different business models, but both are united in the firm belief of technology as an enabler to help us solve our problems, right? Good. So we're first up, and so part of our task is to make sure that the table is set for the program that follows us. So part of the theory of the change behind the Xynteo Exchange is that the future of growth depends fundamentally on businesses and the people who lead them. 69 of the world's 100 largest economic entities are businesses. They sit atop a massive pile of human, technological, and financial resources. And increasingly, the most powerful of these companies are in the tech sector. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, Facebook. And not too far after them, we have Verizon, of which you, Hans, have been CEO since 2018.
Yeah.
Could you kick us off by sort of sharing your view of the influence of companies and tech companies in particular, and how you sort of feel about this responsibility personally?
Yeah, I think first of all, I had the luxury of working with technology basically in my whole career, and I realized pretty early on when I lived in Latin America how powerful technology is in order to get inclusiveness and people getting access to the same information. So somewhere I believe that the mobility, broadband, and cloud is basically the 21st century's infrastructure. What do I mean by that? I mean that basically if we're going to get everyone on this planet have the same opportunities as some of us have had, we cannot scale with the same infrastructure. It has to be in technology infrastructure, and that is actually that you are connected. You have broadband, so you get wideband information, and then you have cloud services that are sitting on top of the network, because suddenly it doesn't matter where you're born, you can get access to education, healthcare, information, whatever it can be. So I have a firm belief that that is extremely important. At the same time, I think, at least in my case, you feel enormous responsibility in today's world when you're leading a company of our size, and the impact you can have, the platform you have, which is just absolutely enormous. I have 150,000 employees. If I take my supply chain, it's a couple of million people. We invest in infrastructure, 17 to 18 billion US dollars a year. So of course, I have an enormous impact that I personally can do to make good with the technology, still part of the strategy. And I think that ultimately, company like ours, we're going to be judged by the customers and consumers. We can talk about regulation, and we might end up talking, should you regulate technology companies and all of that. The only thing I say, it's really hard, because the technology is moving so dramatically fast. And you just go back 10, 15 years, and to be honest, we just had a 3G phone that can do text messages. How fast it's going, if you try to regulate today and 20 years from now, it's just going to be another word. I think what is going to happen, it has to happen, is that responsible leaders lead these companies, and ultimately we're going to be judged by our consumers or our customers to actually to do the right things, because if they don't like you, ultimately they're not going to use you, because we have a totally different new generation that's going to judge you as your leadership and what you're doing as a company. So that's where I come from, and I have the fortune to lead a company of that size, that I can actually make an impact, and I actually think about it every day, and I feel extremely responsible for taking the right decisions that is encompassing everything we're doing, all the way from my customers to my shareholders to my employees, and how we shop in society. That sort of, those four stakeholders is in my mind when we do measurement. It's not only one. You just need to manage all four of them in order to have a long-term success of the company. And every time you decide if you want to run a company, you actually run a company for perpetual usage in the future, and then you just need to take the right decisions.
So you feel that you both have an enormous responsibility, you have an enormous amount of influence, but also that it's the right business decision as we go forward. So underlying our sort of one of our central hypotheses here is the fact that we believe that solutions need to make commercial sense. So we need sort of the profit motive to get solutions to stick. Jimmy, your sort of approach and your experience of Wikipedia tells sort of a different story. So I'd love to hear your take on, what do you make of the idea that businesses are going to save us and that they're going to make a good profit as they do so?
I think I'm a very strong believer in that. And actually, of course, Wikipedia is owned and operated by the Wikimedia Foundation, which is the charity I set up for that purpose. And so we're a nonprofit, but at the same time, we are just like any other business. We don't have shareholders to answer to, but we have to be sustainable. We have to bring in more money than we spend. We are not funded by government grants, and so all the support that we get is purely voluntary. So much like any business, if our customers, the donors, aren't happy with what we're doing, then they won't give us money. And in particular, in our case, we can't, they'll still get the service, right, whether they give us money or not. And so I do think that framework of thinking about things is critically important, and it's important from multiple perspectives. So one, we can't, when we're thinking about policy making, we can't simply assume business should do whatever business does and the government should solve the problems. That doesn't work. I think it has to be a much more holistic approach. It means as consumers, we have every right and every responsibility to demand of the companies that we do business with that they aren't doing things that are damaging or harmful and so forth. I mean, the fellow standing here who was talking about the plastic, that some of the logos on the plastic was from the company where he works, that's a really interesting struggle because your first temptation of an answer to your daughter is, well, those people shouldn't have thrown it out like that. But he obviously doesn't take that view, and that's obviously not the right view. However, we as consumers can't just say, oh, how terrible it is, that they're selling these plastic straws, although plastic straws is such a minor thing, right? But it's a classic example. Meanwhile, we're slurping on our Coca-Cola and complaining about the plastic straws. It's like, wait a minute, we actually are a part of the whole ecosystem. We do have power to demand change, and we should demand change.
This is a collective responsibility, collective influence. Thank you. So with great power comes great responsibility. So said either Voltaire or Spider-Man's uncle, according to the internet, just so you know. So as the power of tech companies grows, it's natural that society expects more of them. Yeah. Citizens want to know what's in it for them. What's the size of the prize, as it were, when we're thinking about how we can leverage this enormous capacity for good. So Jimmy, I suppose that a part of what's driven you is a potent optimism in the potential of tech, not just to inform society, but to empower it. Help our audience understand what societal challenges you feel technology can take sort of the biggest chunk out of. So one of the ones that obviously unites Hans and I is access. Yeah. And so this is something I've always said about the mobile phone industry. When we're talking about for-profit, non-profit, this is an unapologetically for-profit industry. Yeah. They want to make a lot of money, and they do make a lot of money. Yeah. And yet, every executive I've met, almost uniformly throughout that business, also understands that there is something transformative about that technology for everyone in the world. The ability for people to get access to knowledge in a new way. Now, Verizon's, as far as I know, the largest business is in the US. That obviously there are poor people in the US. Yeah. We've worked with mobile providers around the world, not in the US, with a program called Wikipedia Zero, where they provide zero rated, no data charges for accessing Wikipedia, which is a little controversial with some of the net neutrality kind of things. But it's very powerful. And we have this group of students in South Africa who, on their own, wrote an open letter to their mobile carriers saying, "Please, could we have access? Our school library doesn't have any books, and we do most of our homework by looking at Wikipedia, but airtime's expensive for us. Could we please get free access?" And they did that. And they did it as I say, it's both that idealism of saying, wow, this is amazing. We have a technology that some of the poorest people in South Africa are now getting mobile devices, getting smartphones. They could get access to educational materials for free. That's incredibly powerful. And of course, they said, well, a lot of those poorest people are cautious about using data. They're not really sure what it's for, and so it's a way to introduce them to it. And so it's a win-win all around, and that really works. But that technology, like the information and the knowledge that you can get for free today, and increasingly even the poorest people in the world are able to afford a smartphone and so on. We've still got a ways to go on that, but it's incredible the progress that's been made purely by Moore's Law and the ongoing march of the cheapening of technology. It's very powerful, and in another 10, 20 years, access to the internet will be about the same as access to radio, which is, virtually 100% of everyone on the planet. That's an amazing thing to think about, and it's really transformative for people who go from a situation where they have almost no access to information, also no access to organizing with each other to demand a better life, to suddenly having those tools. And I think that's still remains for me a real focus of what technology can do. Excellent, thank you. Hans, what do you think?
No, I agree. We need to realize, the growth of technology, especially mobility, has been just dramatic. Still, it's only 50% of the Earth population that has access to internet. And we think it's just mind-boggling how fast it has gone. Mobile coverage is way bigger, and mobile phone penetration is way bigger, but they don't have mobile broadband yet. I think that there's a couple of things that is still inhibiting that. First of all, the power grid, the energy grid, is far lesser than the mobile grid. that means that you don't have energy, and you need energy to power the phone or the radio base station. That's actually a big issue. Secondly, still the cost of the device is too high. When you get into tougher areas or tougher countries, it's too expensive. And thirdly, it's actually languages as well. I mean, there are so many languages spoken on this planet, and still the websites are on certain languages. That means that even though this is the tool for the future, we are not there yet. But I think we're probably going to be there in 5 to 10 years. And then I would say any government in the world actually have a tool in their hands which has been developed by the private sector, but can be used in order to reach their citizen and include their citizen. If that's 0 rating on Wikipedia or 0 rating on an education portal for the country or a healthcare portal, I think it's just obvious it's one of the best infrastructure there is to get there. So I actually started, some of you might remember the Millennium Development Goals. Those were the goals from 2000 to 2015. And I was in Africa working a lot during that time, and we started with healthcare workers with a mobile phone and all of that, and you saw the power of technology. And then when the decision came up for the Sustainable Development Goal 2015, I was part of discussing that, and I fought like hell to get goal 18, which should be that any country in the world should have a certain mobile and broadband penetration, because that is really supporting a transformation and getting everybody having the same possibility wherever you're born. As you all know, it became 17 goals, so I lost. But I still see that the 17 are included in, it's included in mobility, broadband, and cloud in all of them. So now I'm a strong believer that we can only scale sustainable by using technology. There's coming challenges with it, but that should not inhibit us or putting boundaries on it. We just need to work with the issues we get with it instead, because 95% of the technology is good, 5% is bad, and we just need to work with that part much more instead.
Yeah. Okay, so what we see then, so we're aligned, huge promise. But as we know, and the idea now is not to sort of descend into sort of a Blade Runner apocalypse view of the future. However, as we think about the sort of road to being able to tap into the enormous potential of technology, we know that there are a number of potholes on the road. Right, and so if I'm just looking at the Slido here, the questions are ticking in. Why should we? How can we better liberate data for social good without undermining privacy? We have stuff about trust here, data sovereignty, fake news, fraud, etc. So I'd love for us now to sort of pivot a little bit and get into some of those dilemmas. Again, not because we want to dwell there, but if we think about how we're going to tap into the potential, these are things that need to be addressed with deliberateness. So Hans, why don't you kick us off there?
Oh, I think that we see what's happening in our society every day. I mean, cybersecurity is one thing when everything is connected. Privacy is another. Integrity of data. I mean, suddenly, once upon a time, if you're old enough, you remember everything was on paper, so you can actually get papers. If a database vanishes today, you don't exist. There's a lot of redundancies that are extremely important when it comes to data. So all of that is, for me, things that we just need to handle, because if the trust barrier is broken, then we cannot use this technology to scale. Of course, things will happen and which are not good, etc. But we just need to find a model where we actually address those challenges. And I said, I'm not sure that regulation will solve it. We just need to get responsible leaders, and ultimately the consumers and the customers going to judge the companies that are not following that and not doing it. That's at least how I try to articulate for my team that I work with every day. Hey guys, if we do something stupid, we're going to be judged by our customers and our consumers very soon, and we cannot repair. It's too late when that's happening. And I think that's the balance we need to find for privacy. Cybersecurity is another, because as the bad guys was going to banks and taking all the money before, they are going to the cloud now and stealing information. So you're going to have bad people there. You just need to defend yourself as good as you can, which we do every day. But I think that privacy, trust is becoming important. The ones that don't care about it and think about, no, my money, I make so much money so I don't need to care about it, ultimately they're going to be impacted, and they're going to be impacted negatively.
Yeah, I think a stat I just read in the latest Edelman Trust Barometer, I think it's 60% of Americans don't trust tech companies to take the right decisions with their data.
That excludes Verizon, but continue.
Of course, of course. So Jimmy, you were talking earlier.
In that I don't want to be in the grouping with others.
Then you just keep jumping in and out.
I'm moving in and out there. Yeah.
Very convenient. So Jimmy, you were talking earlier about the promise of sort of technology as a leveler in terms of creating more and more access to information. But I guess there's a bit of a pitfall there too in terms of the quality of that information. Yeah. It doesn't matter so much if you're just downloading crap in higher and higher volumes at greater and greater speeds. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have seen a real problem that the transition to the internet for the news media in particular has been very rocky, been very difficult. We've seen with the era which we are just now coming out of, I would say, of advertising-only business models for journalism. Those have been very, very destructive for journalism. Good quality news organizations still fight to do good quality journalism, but the business model doesn't make a lot of sense for them. What makes a lot more sense is to hire a bunch of amusing millennials to write clickbait and generate a lot of noise, and that's a deep structural problem. The advertising-only driven social networks also have an incentive to just keep you clicking. Headlines that generate a lot of response tend to be inflammatory, outrage, and so on. And that's not even getting into some of the deeper problems. So deeper problems around what this has meant for local journalism, which has been largely destroyed. I mean, it's a really, I would say decimated, but the technical meaning of decimated is 1 in 10. It's much worse than that, more like 9 out of 10. And that's a huge social problem that we are going to be paying the price for slowly in the long run. If you don't have good quality local journalism, it doesn't happen overnight, but eventually you get good, solid local corruption, a loss of trust in society, loss of trust in institutions. You mentioned the Edelman Trust Barometer, and trust is very, it's been damaged across a large sector, and actually a few years ago, it's gotten a little bit better, I think, last year, but trust in news media fell lower than trust in politicians, which is really, really bad. So that's a huge problem. And then, I haven't even mentioned sort of the real, like true fake news, not, Donald Trump calls everything he doesn't like fake news, but there has been a problem of genuinely fake websites, either just done almost like spam, just as a quick way of generating some money, or state-sponsored disinformation campaigns. And I think we're still quite vulnerable to that. I know right now there's some advertising being run on Facebook, as I understand, that CNN refused from the president because CNN said it's just provably false. And so there's a complicated issue. There's a very complicated problem there. And I think that the companies involved in that, again, it's one of these things. I've said this to people at Facebook, and Facebook has a real opportunity because unlike most companies, Mark has such power that he actually doesn't have to worry about quarterly results, and not in the same way that many CEOs do. He can say, we're going to make some decisions now that will cost Facebook money in the short run to sustain the long-term future of the business. And I've said to people at Facebook, the long-term future of your business is going to hinge in very large part on people not believing that you're destroying civilization. So you have to take that problem very seriously, and I think they are. Maybe a little slower than even they would have hoped. I don't think they realize the depth and the magnitude of it. So yeah, there's dangers out there. But one of the things that gives me optimism is, we see at, Wikipedia's incredibly popular. Anytime something happens in the news, people flood to Wikipedia. We see it's a very news-responsive thing because people just want that kind of very neutral, dry. They want information, not clickbait headlines and inflammatory stuff. They want to understand the world, and so there is an opportunity there, but there's a structural dilemma right now.
Yeah, just like
can you add there because I agree with you. One of the challenges I see is, of course, I'm going to go back to the history, and of course, it was not better before, but you had your newspaper and you actually need to flip all pages to see something. The whole sort of advertising model is basically double down on whatever you know and what type of people you always talk to. So the diversity of thoughts and things like that is getting diminished because you only see, if you only like soccer, ultimately you only get soccer news and that's the only thing you get and you don't get anything else. That is a little bit scary over time if we don't get that diversity and understanding. And of course, Wikipedia is not like that. That there you can get all the information. And I think that when I think about the next generation, about they're getting narrower and narrower, even though they get much more information, they get much more narrower because they only talk to people that are like-minded and like-interested. And of course, that's ultimately is not creating a good society when you're that type of society.
Yeah.
This is only a joke, really, but I never in my life felt old until I downloaded TikTok.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, totally incomprehensible.
Lord, what a completely useless application.
I haven't even downloaded it yet.
Don't. It's ridiculous.
Okay.
But so TikTok. As a parent. I find a lot of this baffling. I learned the term not too long ago, the extractive attention economy. Have you heard that? So what's your, these sort of, people coming up with charges that this kind of society is, maybe changing our brains, is going to make us a very different, altering the fabric of society. Is that? What do you think of that?
I'm a little skeptical of those claims. I do think there are things to be concerned about when we have social media companies whose business model demands attention as the primary thing. See, one of the big differences, the only reason you give money to Wikipedia, you don't have to, is when that banner pops up and you think, you know what, this has made my life better, I'm going to give money. So we always know that. So it's not about keeping you addicted, keeping you on the site as long as possible. It's about you having a meaningful experience. It might only be once a month, but at the end of the year you might go, yeah, that really helped me on that one thing I needed to know. And so there is a little bit of a concern about that. But I just think, kids are kids, people are people, we've been the same forever. I don't think we're... it's, as I say, it's the first time I really felt old, but then again, I am old, so no wonder I don't like what the kids like anymore.
It's all relative. So. So just looking at some of the stuff coming in here, another prominent theme seems to be around jobs and the future of work. And obviously the apprehension around the substitution of human labor with machine labor and exacerbating the sort of difference in returns on capital versus the returns on labor. Hans, what would you say to that? How do you want to take that?
I would have two answers. The first one is that we call this the fourth industrial revolution, or it could be the fifth technology revolution. It's a little bit how you see it. All of them had two phases. The first phase, you innovate something. In the second phase, you actually use it and transform things dramatically. If that was the industrialization, or it was the steam engine or something like that, all of them have dramatically changed our workplace. Dramatically. Suddenly all works that you had before is not existing in the second phase. Usually happens over 60 years, 30 years the first phase and 30 years the other phase. So if I'm a little bit naive, I say that that's probably what's happening right now as well. We are going into the fourth industrial revolution where technology is the enabler and the AI, ML and everything is coming, taking away, automating a lot of stuff, and we're going to create other works. However, this is probably far more reaching than any other transformation we've ever had. What we have learned from the previous ones is that the ones that is coming late into the game and resisting it, they usually get a much deeper recession.
Yep.
Just imagine, I take an example, and it's not a live example. If you resist Uber in a country and saying, we don't have them for years, and then suddenly they come in, then the breakage is much bigger than you let them in and they be part of the society. Not saying that was just an example, it could be many others. So that I think that governments need to think about, because regulating and wait technology transformation will only happen that the longer the wait, the harder recession will be. Then I think that on the second phase, when you get a little bit more realistic and taking away the historical of it, you start to thinking about, okay, I'm going to run a company right now, 140, 150,000 employees. What type of workplace do I have in the future? If I listen to millennials, everybody wants to be self-employed, they want to work 1 year for every company, want to move around. That's really hard to manage a company like that. And then you need to think about, how do you create a company that people want to stay at? You create a great purpose. You think about all the stakeholders. And I can tell you, the millennials, they will stay as well. But you need to be a totally different company, much more proactive on all this stuff, and then you can actually make it happen. I think that's the only way to do it. And then continuous learning, is a cliche or something like that, but today, in today's world, I mean, I was trained to be an accountant, which I don't use so much nowadays, but you don't need to do so much innovation to be an accountant, but to be in technology, you need constantly to learn. And companies need to be much more responsible for the education. We cannot expect that the public sector will do education, then you get the youth in, and then you're finished. That will not work. So you need to change that whole paradigm shift, that you might get some basic from public or private education, and then when you come to the company, that's really where you have continuous learning.
Thank you. Do you want to come back on that?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with all of that, and I always like to talk about one example. So we're moving very, very quickly towards autonomous vehicles, driverless cars. And so in the United States alone, there are about 2 million people who have jobs as long-haul truck drivers. And if you've ever driven long distances in the United States, it's really, really super easy. The interstate highway system is very good and very clear and simple. And so that's a very low-hanging fruit. It's quite hard to imagine autonomously driving around central London. It's a mess and complicated. Those long-haul truck driver jobs are going to be the first to go. That's 2 million people, largely men, who have very poor other job prospects in the large. They've not trained for other careers. And as far as I can tell, governments everywhere, I mention US just because I happen to know the 2 million number, but this is true in Europe, it's true everywhere, they're basically just kind of in wait and see mode, and it's a little bit late for that. It's coming faster than they realize. And this is going to cause enormous social upheaval. These are unionized, the truck driving unions in the US have been a long time, but there's some history of violence and so on. This is the kind of situation that's going to generate a lot of disruption. And that disruption might take the form of electing authoritarian leaders. It might take the form of enormous strikes, disrupting commerce, which is whatever, people have a right to.
Domestic violence.
A lot of things, right? Yeah. And also it's also can just be people out of work, which then leads to alcoholism and sort of social failures throughout society. So I think that yes, companies do have to be proactive and assume that they have to take a role in the education. I can't expect the trucking companies to very much invest in training their drivers for the future. That's just not going to fit their business. So the public sector also has to be focused on this and thinking about, how do we invest in these people? How do we make sure that they have good opportunities for retraining and so forth? And so far, not much has moved there. And I think it's time that we really push to say, hold on, we're going to have a huge problem if we don't do this. And this is not, there'll be blame against technology companies for putting these people out of work, but this is inevitable. This technology is coming. This isn't a choice that one company is doing something upsetting. It's like a shift. It's a shift that's happening.
No, so
and with enormous, the number of road deaths is going to be slashed dramatically and so on. There's enormous benefits to this. Truck driving is not a very pleasant job. And so if humans don't have to do unpleasant work, that's great. But we have to make sure they have more interesting and more financially profitable work.
Yeah, no, thank you. So I think you've teed up one of those, that dilemma around the future of work really, really beautifully, and the fact that it does sort of feel like in all corners of society, we're in a wait-and-see mode, and we need to get out in front. We're going to round off in just a second, and I'd like you guys to answer one final question as quickly as you can. Is that it's all very well to point out the trust dilemma that we face with tech. And you mentioned, Hans, that businesses simply have to be more responsible. Can you give us a concrete example of how tech companies can stop the downward slide in trust that we're seeing around tech?
It goes back to yourself, and think about yourself being a consumer or customer in every decision you take. And actually think a little bit longer than the next quarter or the next 2 weeks when you take a decision on how you monetize data, etc. I mean, in our case, we have decided on the wireless side we don't monetize data anymore. We drew all of the locally based services which we had and all of that because. Of course, it was money that we had on the table that we can easily have third parties monetize the data. But on the other hand, over time, that's going to be bad. So you just need to think about what are you ready to do as a consumer when you have those decision power that we have.
Thank you, Hans. Jimmy, final word.
Oh, that's great. People used to say, you'll be able, when you're walking down the street, you'll get an advertisement for the restaurant you're walking by. I'm like, that is the last thing I want. Please don't do that.
Okay, we're taking that away.
No, that's good. No, I agree. I do think long-term thinking. I think that a lot of businesses do make the mistake of not realizing that some of these fundamental, deeper, long-term issues they're not just sustainability issues in the general sense. They're about the sustainability of your company. Your company won't survive if you're on the wrong side of some major shifts. And so, yeah.
Great. So get on the right side of history.
Yes.
Thank you very much. That's all we have time for right now. I am delighted to move on to our next very exciting session, which will be led by Toril Vidvei. Toril is the former Minister of Petroleum and Energy in Norway, as well as our former Culture Minister, and she's now also the chair of the board of Statkraft. Before I hand over to that treat, please join me in thanking our two wonderful speakers. Hans, Jimmy, thank you.
Thank you.